Hi and welcome to Car Mechanical, and today we're on part 2 of Project Oynx, the budget roller paint job. So we're going to look around the car first, and this is the following day from the previous video. One of the important reasons that I'm pointing out is the following day is this needs about 24 hours to dry before you put your next coat on. So as we look around, we can see that things have dried, and I don't know if you can tell from the pictures, but there's quite a few high points and there's a few dribbles and a few points where I've rolled too much paint into it in any one place. So before the second coat goes on, I need to deal with some of these dribbles and some of these blobs. So what we're going to do in a moment is we're going to do some wet sanding, and I believe that we're using 400 grit, and I'm using a block sander that's been soaked in water. Now, ideally, if I'd have done a good enough job on the first coat, I really wouldn't need to be going over wet sanding it by the time I've come to the second coat. But this is a learning process as I've been going through it. So the key things I want to point out to everyone is, if you use a good technique to put on as little paint as possible, so you literally just want enough paint on the roller to transfer onto the car, and if you need to do multiple layers but going as light as possible, it's going to help out. Now, when you're wet sanding, what you find you have to do is you do have to keep reapplying water. So I could have done this with a spray bottle, but just at the moment I keep getting the sander wet by putting it in a tray full of water, and I just keep reapplying it. And with wet sanding, you just want to use barely any pressure. You just want it to float over the area of the car that you are working on. You don't want to be scrubbing into it hard and removing all the paint. To be honest, with just one layer, that starts to happen by itself. However, what I do manage to do is take out sort of these blobs and bits and pieces and just take it back down to an even layer height. Now, the other thing that you're going to find on a roller job, I don't think there's any help in it unless you've got a covered area, and if you did have a covered area, you should probably be spraying it. Now, what you're going to find with the roller job is that you are going to get flies that land in the paint, so you are going to have to wet sand them out after anyway. But what I've done, I'd go over the entire car and I just wet sand all of the really bad points. So this would be like where I pushed the roller too hard and dribble lines occurred. So moving on to mixing up some paint, and you kind of mix it in a figure eight movement, and that's just to mix all of the elements of the paint together before I put it into the jug. So I think on the second day I might have gone 70-30 on the mix. It's a bit harder to tell from memory and from what you're looking at there. But I think it was 70-30, and I mentioned on the first day your mix is going to depend on how thick or how thin you want the paint, how hot it is, because if it's a nice hot day, the white spirit's going to evaporate even quicker and your paint's going to go off quite quick. So looking at that, I think I went 70-30 on this coat. So what you do is once you've put that in, you're going to mix it up, and unlike day one, I've remembered my equipment and I'm using a chopstick, and it's probably the easiest, best thing to use to mix it all up because of their disposable. So I can just use it and you can gauge it, and the best way I've heard this said online is to get the paint to about the consistency of milk. So you're going to pour just a little bit into the tray that you're going to use, and one of the things, again, just to point out whilst we are about to start, I throw the trays away after every day. I throw the rollers away after every day. They're so cheap that you don't need to keep hold of them. Now, this first part what I'm going to do, before I roller everything, I'm going to go around and touch up all of the edges. So everything the roller can't touch, I'm going to get into. And to be fair, this probably should have been the first thing before the roller made its way onto the car, because when the roller then goes on, it gets to smooth everything over. And I probably would have been better in doing this one panel at a time and then rollering the rest of that panel. So do the detail on the door and then roller the door, and it lets you blend out the rest of the paint before giving it a chance to dry. Nevertheless, one of the things that you do need to do, whichever order you want to do it, is you're going to go around and you're going to get paint into every crack. So you're going to get it on the door handle, around the gaps on the door handle, in between all your panel gaps, in between your roof line and your windows, in between your lights, etc. So you're just going to go around and you're going to hit everything. Now, try and keep as little paint again on the foam brush I'm using. You can use a paintbrush, but you just don't want dribbles because they're going to leave you areas that you need to clean up. So now that's done, we can get on to putting the second layer of paint onto the car. I'm going to use the bonnet as a focus on a lot of the build because of it gives you a consistent area to see. I mentioned build, I meant the paint job. Now you can see some of these lines that are coming out as I do this here, and that's actually probably down to the roller not being perfectly cylindrical. So Ideally what I should have been doing at this point is going over it with this second roller. You just notice that dot that's there. I'm going to pick it out in a minute. I can't remember if that was part of the roller or a fly that landed into it. You're going to get that over the course of this job. Just take them off when you can and then paint over it after. So I'll just get rid of that there and I smooth over the paint afterwards. Now, as you do move through this, what you want to be doing, I mentioned before, as little paint as possible. I've probably gone a bit too thick here, and that's why I'm working it throughout the car. But you want to put the paint on, and then you're going to work it around to smooth it out and not to have any streaks or any lines. At the very end of all the painting, you're going to be wet sanding the car with about 1,000 grit sandpaper to bring the levels down. But for now, we're just going to apply the paint, and we just want to apply it so you are going to get these bubbles, but you're going to chase over them afterwards with the roller. Now in the third coat, which is going to come up in a couple of videos time, I start doing it with 2 rollers. It was something I hadn't quite picked up on at first, and I use a wet roller as such, and then I use a dry roller. So I'll apply with the wet roller into an area, and I'll use a dry roller to spread and to smooth everything over. So just as we lay it onto the bonnet or the hood, whichever way you'd like to call it, we can see that we're starting to get some decent coverage of the paint. Remember, after this first one I did some wet sanding and some of the paint already came off. And you can see just to the side there's a few sort of marks. That's going to need dealing with at some point in a future video. So we'll put the paint onto roller again and just really squeeze out as much as you can and get that roller nice and dry. So what I'm going to do now is we're going to do some of the side of the car, some of the roof. Now I'm going to go over some of the points of how we've been working on it. So the paint will start to go dry within sort of 15 to 20 minutes of being applied. So when you are working on an area, don't go too big to come back. Try and focus on one small area at a time. Ignore what I'm doing in some of this video, which is going back and forth over a large area. If you focus into one area, so like do your bonnet, then do your wing, and do your bumper, and then do a door, and so on and such forth, and do that as complete as you can, because you're going to get a more consistent finish as you do it. And again, with this, with the flashing time, it flashes off perhaps within 15-20 minutes, half an hour or an hour, depending on the weather and the mixture of the paint. But for it to become hard, it takes about 24 hours. And hard is subjective with the type of paint this is, so it's oil enamel paint. And it needs a week to sort of become fully hard. So if you was going to properly wet sand it, you'd probably put the paint on and then wait a week before you do your full wet sand. So I'm just going to work this all over the roof, and I've started to pick up on it. You should do it in one direction because you get a bit of a more consistent finish. However, I'm making that mistake of going back over areas again and again rather than getting them right the first time. So that's the second coat done. And I've skipped stages I'm trying to show you the same areas of the car as we go over it, but we can see that we're starting to get more consistent coverage. So the second day working on the car was quicker than the first because I didn't have to do all of the masking, didn't have to do all of the main bulk of sanding. The wet sanding probably still took an hour, and there's probably a few hours in the second coat of paint, if not more. Honestly, I struggle to remember how much time it did take, but I can see that the colour's starting to become a bit more consistent. So at this point I can start taking off the masking tape I've put on, and I can spot any of the panel gaps that I might have left in. So if there's any blue paint, this would probably be the ideal time to run around and to deal with some of the detail touch up. So take off all of your blue painter's tape, and then when you start to notice just the odd little bits, if you've got some paint mixed up, or if not, go and mix them up and just touch up the little details. And little bits like this, if you go over the blue painter's tape, I'm using panel wipe on the rag I've got, and if you just work it in, it does lift anything off of the lights or the glass. So we can get the indicators back in, and we can put the side indicators or repeaters back in as well. We'll put the bulbs in behind, but I'm not going to show you that. And that's the car back on the road. I give it until the end of the day before I start driving it, because I need to drive it back to home. However, you can see this is how it initially looks after the second coat. and you can see there's actually quite a few sort of visible marks between the paint as you go around. So when you join me in part 3 of the roller paint job, I'm going to show you how I'm going to deal with that, and also I've mentioned about the better technique I use with twin rollers. So guys, if you want to see the rest of the series as it comes out, please hit the subscribe button, also for any other videos that I release. If you have any questions or comments, please leave them in the comment section down below. If you like this video, hit the like button, and if you think anyone else will benefit from this video or like it too, please share it out to them. And more than anything, thank you for watching.